Okay, everybody, please follow me. 起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位点传师一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated. Okay, ready to rock and roll? I am going to mute my microphone, sir.
Okay, thank you. And good morning or good evening, whatever's appropriate for the time zone everyone's in. We have enough of them now that I can't officially keep track of them all. It is a wonderful thing to see everyone gathered here together to engage in this process of unfolding the understanding of the Tao teachings. The talk I have for this week was a special request for a look into some of the philosophical sayings of Kung Fu, the TV series. And so over the course of the week, I hopped out on YouTube, which is someplace that I virtually never visit, and went through a number of the clips from that show. And one of the most popular that appeared over and over and over and over again in the various compilations that I found was one that referred to living a life of peace and non-contention. And so without further ado or introduction, I'm going to play this short clip here, and then we'll delve into this just a little bit.
Master, how may I walk in the path when the world is seldom peaceful?
Peace lies not in the world, but in the man who walks the path.
But in my path may be men not filled with peace.
Then seek a different path.
And if at each turn appear those who would be violent and do not love peace.
To reach perfection, man must develop equally compassion and wisdom.
But Master, how do I not contend with the man that would contend with me?
In a heart that is one with nature, though the body contends, there is no violence. And in the heart that is not one with nature, though the body be at rest, there is always violence. Be careful. Like the prow of a boat, it cleaves the water, yet it leaves in its wake water unbroken.
Okay. While I'm not typically a big fan of TV Taoism, I am a huge fan of peace and peacefulness, and a huge proponent of the practices of Taiji Chuan and Qigong. And so there is definitely some merit to this video clip. And I credit the folks who produced Kung Fu the series with at least making a valiant effort at portraying a more peaceful, more joyous alternative lifestyle from the typical secular striving and struggling that most people are involved in their lives. But the clip begs the question, what is real peace? What does it mean to be the person who walks the path of peace? How do we get there? What do we do? How do we understand? Well, this isn't a topic that's too terribly far removed from my heart. I've struggled for countless years to achieve some kind of internal peace and lasting tranquility and calm. I think most people do. I think from time to time we get close to achieving it, but because of our attachments, our desires, our preferences, our fears, very often that peace and equanimity is disturbed by the world intruding upon the solitude of our minds. Perhaps on walking that path to sagehood, we finally one day learn how to give up those anxieties and mental machinations, to be truly devoid of the disturbances of a mind in upheaval. But to me, there are a few things that I believe can help us attain that life of peace. I think real peace, first of all, is in the heart and mind of one who's truly mastered himself. In the TV series Kung Fu, you watch via flashbacks and life scenarios the evolution of a young boy who eventually learns to understand himself, and through understanding himself, understand others. And not at a superficial level where he simply understands the emotions that drive him, but at a very deep and very spiritual level that allow him to obtain genuine mastery over himself, and because of that, over his situation. And time again, although there is a bit of action in this series, you see this man, as he's grown, avoid walking a path of violence and turbulence and upheaval whenever possible, to seek a path of peace and non-contention. And in point of fact, the TV show and the teachings of Tao cultivation share that common trait. But to be one who's achieved that level of internal mastery is to become not just, once again, superficially aware of our emotional states and the mental anguishes and fears that drive us, but it is to become free of those things, to become one who's run out of things to prove, to be one who doesn't have to be right or argue some point that doesn't really matter to anyone after an hour of silence. It means to be one who truly owns nothing, who doesn't have attachments to the secular junk that we all surround ourselves with. It means to be without attachments not only to the stuff, but to our own preferences, our own desires, our own fears, the illusions of this life, if you will. To be driven not by what we're afraid of losing or striving to attain, but to be driven by the true nature, the true self. It's to become one who reflects a natural virtue, an innate goodness that transcends thought and contrivance and any kind of intrigue or subterfuge. It's the kind of virtue that has no hidden agendas, that has no goals, no ambitions. It's to become one who's filled with compassion, so that we understand that other people who may contend with us are really just other souls on the same path that we're on, but perhaps a little earlier on the path, or not quite as potentially evolved as some of us may be. And please understand, I don't refer to myself as tremendously spiritually evolved or particularly having mastered myself. For me, that's still one day at a time, and very much a matter of how I'm doing in the moment. It means becoming one who doesn't contend with others. It means giving up the need to be right, the need to prove a point, the need to overcome, whether that's verbally or physically or in any other way. It means to find an alternative method of dealing with other people that doesn't involve us trying to be superior to them in some way or prevent them from becoming superior to ourselves. And in point of fact, we have the perfect shining example of non-contention within the temple itself. We refer to each other in the temple as our older Tao brothers and sisters. Our older Tao brothers and sisters have nothing to do with their age, relatively speaking. It has to do with respect for their understanding and their knowledge. I have always and will always consider Derek to be my older Tao brother. He has, over the years, taught me more than he probably knows. And for that, I'm grateful. I can say the same thing of many of the ordained masters, and in particular of Senior Master Yang, whose memory I will never forget for some reason being interested in me, to take time to teach me, to take time to help me dispel some of the illusions of my Western life in favor of a better path. To this day, I'm not sure what affinity it was that caused her to want to take that time, when it would have been by far easier to take that time for someone who actually spoke the language. But she did. And I'll be forever grateful for that. Walking the path of peace means a life free from contention with other people. It means we don't argue or debate, no matter what the topic. We're not the source of the argument or the debate. Neither are we the recipients of it. It's one thing to know somebody may be incorrect or may have misunderstood something. It's a whole other thing altogether to point it out. And no matter what it is that we think or believe, ultimately in arguing and debating and contending with another person, we don't persuade or cause the other person to change their mind or their beliefs. The very most we can hope for is forced compliance and an awful lot of ill will. And so the victory in arguing and debating is bittersweet at best. If we do that often enough, we're going to find ourselves alone one day, because absolutely nobody's going to want to be around us. If, however, we can find it within ourselves to be quiet and to respect the beliefs and feelings and thoughts of the other person, then whether we fully believe them or not, at least we're viewed as someone who's respectful and attentive. And by being attentive, we open ourselves up to a much wider perspective than we can otherwise gain by speaking. No one who's talking can listen effectively. The only way that we can ever really communicate with other people is to hear what they have to say. To be free from contention is to be free of negative emotions, or at least to control the negative emotions to the point where we don't cause upheaval and turmoil in the hearts and minds of the people around us. Nobody ever asks us, for instance, how we're doing when we see them, and ever really wants to hear the answer to that question. There is a polite societal answer to how you doing. It's I'm okay, I'm just fine. If somebody asks that question and I start off with, well, I've got this broken toe and my corns are killing me, and I'm getting to be old and I can't eat pizza anymore, it's going to take a matter of mere seconds for virtually anyone else to just turn around and walk away. There are some things that people just don't want to hear the answer to. They're social niceties. They grease the skids of social interaction, the interactions between people. And so no matter how we're feeling, no matter what we're thinking, no matter what our emotional state may be, very often that's best kept to ourselves. But better yet is to reach a state where we realize that a certain amount of both good fortune and misfortune are going to come our way, and to be content and at peace with both. Most of our negative emotions are the direct result of our own actions, our own thoughts, our own words. And so by virtue of that, we both dig our own hole and then try to dig our way out of it. Better not to dig than to wind up in over our head. To have a life free from contention is to be one who's not fooled by the illusions of this life, the illusions of power and ownership and control. I talk about these things all the time because those things lead us down the path of desiring and contention and problems in our relationships and in our professional lives and in our family lives. When we truly believe that we own or control anything or have power over anyone, we've lost before we've started. In point of fact, we all own nothing. Okay? We buy a house, we spend 35 years paying for it. At the end, we get a title and deed, but the day after we die, it's not ours anymore. We can't take it with us. I may try to haunt it, but I can't take it with me. And 50 years after that, the house that I spent 35 years paying for may not even be standing. The transient nature of all of the stuff that we accumulate and all of the things that we believe are so urgent and so important in our lives right now is amazing. The things that we agonize and stress over in our jobs and in our homes and in our families and in our relationships, if we look at them honestly, don't amount to a hill of beans. And yet, we claw and we strive and we push so that we can gain control or gain ownership or gain position and power over something that in 50 years' time isn't going to make any difference. In some cases, not even a week or a day's time. There's got to be a better way. The better way is cultivating the Tao teachings, cultivating virtue, and learning peacefulness. It's one thing to speak in riddles and paradoxes, to sound profound without saying anything. It's a whole other thing altogether to establish clarity and understanding and wisdom that allows people to further their understanding of themselves and their environment so that they can have a more joyous, happier, and more fulfilling life. By cultivating our true nature, that part of ourself that transcends the death event, whatever that may be, we can learn to be at peace with ourselves, and that's where the process has to start. If, for whatever reason, we cannot look at ourselves and have peace in our hearts and minds, we sure aren't going to have peace anywhere else. Whatever it is that we look at in the mirror that causes us that stress and anxiety, that absence of peace, is going to follow us everywhere we go. And so part of the process of becoming more spiritually refined is to first learn to be at peace with ourselves, to make amends for the things that we've done that hurt other people where we can, and not do those things anymore, to make ourselves into the people that we should be, so that we become more spiritually refined, more mentally refined, so that we can learn to be at peace with others as well as ourselves, to cultivate compassion so that we can learn forgiveness and tolerance, to understand ourselves better so that we become less quick to judge others for their misdeeds and misgivings. Every Buddha who's ever existed, I believe, told their followers not to deify him. And in point of fact, because I run a Tai Chi school from time to time, I run into one who would put me up on that pedestal as well. It's probably the only thing I'll ever share with a Buddha. I don't know what they said word for word, but what I say is, please don't put me on that pedestal, because I absolutely guarantee you I'll let you down. And the reason I say that is because I'm human just like they are. One day I'm going to make a mistake. One day I'm going to be wrong. I'm going to not be as fully informed as I should be. I might react emotionally to something. I might do something that someone else doesn't like. And if I'm up there on that pedestal, if I have to live up to the expectation of that deification, it isn't going to work. I don't have the ability to live up to that expectation. And so I'm going to fall off that pedestal. And then somebody's going to point a finger at me and say, see, we knew you were wrong. Well, okay, I told you not to put me up there to begin with. By not judging others so quickly, by not being willing to point that condemning finger, we take the first step towards not contending with others. That first step towards acceptance, towards tolerance, towards forgiveness, towards real peace. And that's a hard thing to do. We judge and evaluate people all the time, usually by how they look. You know, the old saw of you never get a second chance to make a first impression is true, because we judge people in the first 15 to 30 seconds that we encounter them. And we make decisions based on that. Maybe a bit of temperance and forbearance there might help us to make more wise choices. We can only achieve peace through the cultivation of the teachings, some form of spirituality and higher thought that brings about a fundamental change from the inside out of the person, such that integrity and honesty and reliability, cool-headedness and calmness, thoughtfulness, and humility will all come to describe us, because those things describe a person of peace. That can only occur when we're not looking over our shoulder anymore to try and figure out who it was we told what to, or to see if somebody's about to find out that we did something we shouldn't have. It's truly amazing. You never know who's looking and when they're looking. And even when we think nobody's looking, you know, we're still looking. We should be evaluating the things that we say and we do as if we were standing in front of our mother. And perhaps then, once again, we might make some wiser choices. When we finally get to the point where we don't have to stop and think about those things, when our virtue becomes completely natural, then miraculously other people don't have a reason to contend with us. We become the people that nobody wants to argue with. Not because we're mentally tougher or stronger or superior to anyone, but because we just don't provide an opportunity to pick a fight. That's a wonderful state of being to be in. That's the one I've worked for years to achieve. To be the person that people look to for help and guidance and assistance, but that nobody wants to pick a fight with. I don't want to fight. I don't want to argue. I'd a lot rather make my very nearly 7-foot-tall, 300-pound presence invisible. And the longer I practice, the better I get at it. More importantly than perhaps anything is that we all start where we are now. There's no such thing as the right day or time to begin to cultivate the teachings or begin to try to walk the path of peace. That day is now. That time is now. If not now, when? And so if we wait until we think the time's right, we'll never get there. If we wait until we supposedly have improved ourselves to the point where maybe somebody will notice. We'll never start. Cultivating the Tao teachings isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing. It's not about being superiorly evolved or holier than thou when we start. It's simply about being willing to take the first step. And just like in the practice of Tai Chi, everybody starts where they start, at the beginning. And they all get to the end at some point in time or another, in the rather indeterminate future. How long, how fast, how far, all depends on the student, the practitioner. The harder they practice, the more we walk, the sooner we arrive at the destination, if you will. The wonderful thing about the cultivation of the Tao teachings is that there really is no end to that path. Even when we die, what we have managed to have transformed within us will persist in the minds and hearts of those around us. And hopefully maybe a bit of our example will rub off on them and kind of help them get started down that path of peace as well. I've also, over the years, made some observations that I think are or may be beneficial, particularly when it comes to those who'd rather contend than not. I stuck the label on this called the peaceful mind because I actually understand very clearly what it means to not have the peaceful mind. And so perhaps walking the other way helps us to get to the more peaceful state. When our minds are overwhelmed by the secular reality, there can't ever be real peace. The secular reality being the stuff, the power, the positions, the relationships, all of the noise and chaos and weirdness of modern society. You know, we all think in terms of the good old days, no matter when we grow up. We remember when we were kids, and for some reason those times seem to be simpler and easier and better. But the truth of the matter is we were just younger and somebody else was taking the heat for it. And now we're the ones who are grown up and we're taking the heat for it. But we get to choose how much of the secular world is going to invade our minds and our hearts at any one given moment in time. We don't have to choose to be part of that struggle and that striving. Second, it's only in the silence of self-introspection that the noise of the world can be quieted. This I know to be a fact. I do this every day. I have to do this every day. You know, like Derek, I'm involved in data processing, and whether it's real or imagined, there very often is a lot of pressure and a lot of visibility associated with what I do. You guys have all been here when my office phone's gone off, and I've had to silence it, and well, since then I've started to turn that phone off. but it's always there, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so every now and again, I have to take a break from that. And I do that within the quietude of my own mind, within the isolation of my shrine. And it brings me peace, and it brings me back to my center. And then I'm ready to go take another day or two of the usual old stuff. When we finally get comfortable with that silence and with that solitude, when we can finally be happy and comfortable with nothing but ourselves, then we can really quiet and still the mind. And then we can know peace. There have been a couple of times in my life, particularly since I started practicing Tai Chi Chuan, where I've actually, for want of a better term, stepped outside myself for brief moments. And the peace and the joy and the bliss and the beauty of the universe shone through in those moments so brightly and so clearly that quite frankly I didn't want to come back. And I realize a lot of people might call me nuts, and that's okay. That was my experience, perhaps not theirs. But I understand how that feels. And that's where I want to go. I want to live my entire whole rest of my life there. And I'm willing to practice to do it. Everybody else has to find their own reason to continue to do it as well. And if you can, it's very worth the practice. It's very worth the doing. To one who has a peaceful mind, good fortune and misfortune really are only two sides of the same coin. To one who has a peaceful mind, those things don't interfere with their contentment, because they understand that the wheel will continue to turn. In fact, in most of our lives, we're either at the bottom on our way up or the top on the way down, but we spend precious little time at the very top of the wheel and the very bottom. And so that understanding perhaps can make it slightly easier to accept those times when misfortune settles upon us, and to kind of humble ourselves when remarkably good fortune is our lot. To one with a truly peaceful mind, the clamor of the world outside is nothing but meaningless noise. The older I get and the longer I practice, the more literal that sentence becomes. It's a cacophony that given the opportunity, completely disrupts a peaceful and clear vision of reality. It's full of people all noisily scraping away to try to find only that which can be found in silence. And my most fervent hope is that all of those people who are stuck there will one day find this truth so they don't have to be there anymore. To one with a peaceful mind, there's no reason to strive. There's nothing to fight for. There's nothing to hold on to. And that's why we don't have to contend with others. If someone would contend with us, we simply walk around them. And perhaps more importantly than any of those things, a person with a truly peaceful mind knows how much is enough. To not know the answer to that question, Lao Tzu says, is the greatest tragedy of humankind. To continue to strive for more and more and more and more will never fill the place in a heart that does not know peace and doesn't know what's enough. There is nothing in the secular world that fills that hole. It is only through the cultivation of the truth, whether it's the Tao teachings or any others, whatever works, that an individual can fill that hole. Real peace is as much a way of life as it is a feeling. It's a mental state of being to one who cultivates the teachings. It's a place where we go and where we stay. It's the source of clear vision and genuine understanding. It's the pathway, or at least one of them, to the true self. Ultimately, hopefully, to become a gift to be shared with. Okay, something happened. I just got my connection back.
I'm going to disconnect the cell phone. Here we go.
All right.
We were doing so well. Everything was nice right up until that point.
Oh, well, I think it may be my daughter with the chicken pox.
Oh, okay. I think I blamed it on your son mistakenly.
Yeah, could have been him. He's at a birthday party right now.
Ah, gotcha. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No, that's fine. We're at the summary now. So we'll finish up here and get on with the meeting. Thank you. Real peace is something that people have sought for as long as there have been people. It's that desire to be free from strife and from conflict, to be immune to the conflict in the world, to be content and joyous no matter what our circumstances are. Real peace is kind of the outward sign of the evolution of the mind and spirit. It's a sign of quiet strength and a resolute spirit. It's kind of the hallmark of the Tao cultivators who have managed to truly understand themselves. It's a goal of mine, if you will, to finally achieve that degree of peace in my life, and to be able to share that with others. Anyway, along with expecting the unexpected, which happens from time to time around here, thank you all very much for letting me share with you this morning, and have a wonderful Sunday.
Thank you, Bill. I actually have a lot to say about your talk today. But let me convey what other people have already said. Tim brings you the message, that first peace with oneself, then peace with others. And this is great wisdom right there, Bill. The first part sounds so easy, yet it is so difficult.
Yes, it is.
I also have from Elaine, studying the Tao is like coming home, where you have peace, whether it is spiritual, mental, physical, or emotional. This sounds strange, but studying and living the Tao allows me to have peace within myself. Thank you, Bill, for having this type of forum for people to have access or possibility to grow as a human being.
Thank you.
From Pamela, Bill, I experience myself as a better person when I receive your teachings. Thank you. Then I have a thank you from Travis, and a thread of discussion on Taiji and the Tao will be great to hear. So I think that's a wonderful suggestion.
Okay.
So I know plenty of people in this meeting, here in person and also online, are encountering you either for the first time or they don't really know your background. So, Bill, I'm going to take it upon myself to tell your story for you. Feel free to, listening and provide additional details or make editing changes. But let me talk about Bill as a young man. Now, so this is many decades ago. I'm serious. I'm very serious. So Bill at the time had still not been exposed to any of this. He was not too different from other young men of his generation, and at that time he hadn't really worked out what he wanted to do with his life. Now, he happened across a very extraordinary guy. He had this remarkable encounter in his life, and it was set the direction of his life for decades to come up until today. So what happened was that he witnessed this situation, this social situation that escalated into violence. Now, initially, it was something that could have been resolved peacefully. One of the parties was an Asian guy, a Chinese man, who was very polite, a man of peace, very courteous, and gentle, trying to resolve a situation peacefully. On the other side was a fellow who was many times bigger than him, and who felt like because of his physical dominance that he could easily take this matter into his own hands in a violent way. And so, took the initiative to escalate conflict. But then, what was unexpected to Bill was what ensued was that this peaceful, small, gentle guy demonstrated abilities that were blindingly fast and incredibly effective. This was actually a kung fu master that he had seen. So this completely captured young Bill's attention and imagination, and from that moment on in his life, he had one all-consuming goal, and that he wanted to be able to fight like that. Okay? He wanted to be able to defend himself, especially so because Bill had come from an abusive family background, where for him, at that time, as you can imagine, physical security, safety was very important. So he was able to realize his goal. He studied under this master of his for many years, and what he discovered was that this physical art, it was real. He could tell because it was so incredibly efficient and effective. It really worked. And that's how he knew that it was real, that it worked in real life. In real life situations, whether it was in the ring or in a street fight type of situation, he became very physically confident in his abilities. But at the same time, he also developed a hunger for the mental or philosophical aspects of it, because through that exposure to this genuine Chinese fighting art, he could see that there was actually a huge philosophical background that complemented that. He could get bits and pieces, and they matched what he learned physically really well, but there's got to be more. He could sense that there was more. So from that point on, he began a spiritual quest. So what he knew before, for what other people around him knew at the time, it was no longer enough. People around him in that background, they were mostly just like going to church on Sundays. And he, that was okay. And he was very familiar with all of that. He's very familiar with the teachings in the Bible and so forth. But it became not enough. There's got to be more. So he went around in a search. Now, as he encountered, group after group, organization after organization, he started to realize how lucky he was to encounter his Sifu in the first place, his master in the first place, because he discovered how rare it was to find something that was authentic. Whether it was schools teaching martial arts, and by this time he could tell that a lot of them weren't all that authentic. A lot of times you have people who are teaching that really didn't know what they were doing or had not learned from an authentic source, were making stuff up, imagining what's probably right and teaching that. And it's the same on the spiritual side. You had a whole bunch of people, even people who published books, that talked about things that to them sounded right. It's what they imagined the philosophy to be, but Bill could tell that it didn't actually sync with what he knew from actual personal experience. He didn't know what the right thing was exactly, but he knew the wrong thing when he encountered it. It didn't, because it didn't resonate. So where he was sort of like, okay, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I will recognize it when I see it, because I will sense the resonation within. So he continued searching, and at some point, I think maybe about 10 years ago, he encountered what I was starting to do. And I think he had heard me talk a little bit about the misconceptions I was trying to dispel. I was trying to, correct. And some of that, to him struck a chord. Like, oh yeah, That's what I always thought, and that's why these other people, what they're talking about, seems so wrong to me. So he was attracted by what was right. So there's further correspondence. He went to my website. He looked up what it was, saying, the articles that I had published. Everything that I talked about, he felt was very consistent with what he had learned, with the truth that he had learned. So, and I think a few years after that, he had an opportunity to travel to Los Angeles. So he took advantage of that opportunity to come to the temple, talk to everybody, looked at how people are, and also a big part of it, he relied on his feelings, his intuition, and he knew that he had found the right place. And that's how he got himself initiated. And that's also how he eventually ended up setting up his own shrine at his residence, at his house in Indianapolis. And that's how he came to be doing this talk. So if you wonder why does Bill feel so passionate about what he's doing now, about sharing what he had learned, is because the accumulation of that lifelong experience. So Bill, I hope I didn't butcher that.
No, actually, you did real well. For you and I, that was like 15 years ago when you had your very first ever Dow conference call. Remember?
Wow. Okay.
We were
15 years.
running the old MSN forum, and
seems
like
a
half
long
a
time
dozen
ago.
of us got together on the phone.
Seems like a very long time ago.
Yeah.
But then,
yeah.
some of the memories are so vivid, they seem like, a few days ago.
That one in particular.
So
I have to confess, I got a little emotional there because those memories to me are very special. They're
yes,
things
indeed.
that changed my life.
Yeah, I totally understand. And, I have seen the same reaction from many people. It is sort of like, you go for, weeks and weeks, years, months, years. You go for a long time, sort of like, someone walking around in a desert, looking for a drink of water and then finding the oasis, if I can use that metaphor.
Absolutely.
So let me also comment on what is in the West, what Bill has seen. I think Kung Fu, the television series, was actually a pretty good attempt. I will talk about that a little bit. There's the topic today reminds me of a book called The Peaceful Warrior. So I've also, I think many people have read that book. I've also read it. It's also been turned into a movie. So if you don't feel like reading, you can actually rent that on DVD somewhere. So that movie uses elements from Eastern philosophy, and the central character, I think played by Nick Nolte on the big screen, was a sort of a philosophical kind of character. And the philosophies that are talked about in there is a semi-distorted version of the original teachings. So it's heavily filtered from sort of an Americanized, westernized, New Age lens. But even the filtered results is powerful enough to make the book a bestseller and turn the book into a movie. And the Kung Fu television series, that's an old favorite for many, many people. Of course, starring David Carradine, who plays the title character. What's his name? Chang Kwai King? Kwai Chang? Sorry, King. Okay, thank you. I have a very knowledgeable movie television buff here, so I can always rely on him for his encyclopedic knowledge of everything media. So, here, let me say this. In the West, it has always been difficult to separate out what is Buddhism and what is Taoism. And it's not just in the West. In Asia, the two have also been intertwined. Nevertheless, what you see in the television series Kung Fu is not exactly the way that it would be if a Shaolin monk had actually come to America during the days of the Wild Wild West. So, give you some examples. Many of the answers and actions and attitudes exhibited by the main character, David Carradine's character, are actually more in accordance with the Tao than Buddhist teachings. So one example is that Cain encounters a Christian priest, Father Salazar, and Father Salazar is surprised when he hears Cain's. He asked about Cain. And Cain says, in his typical sort of a reserved Asian way, he says, "I am a priest." And so Father said, "Oh, surprised." And he's like, "Well, what do you worship?" And Cain says, "Life." So this is profound wisdom. And let me say that an actual Buddhist monk from the Shaolin tradition would have answered the question differently. It depends on the level of the monk in his Buddhist studies. Now, at the lowest level, a monk would say, "I worship the Buddha." Okay? At a higher level of learning, a high-level monk would say something like, instead of worship, I take refuge in the three jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Of course, everybody's going to be like, what? What? What are you talking about? So those are the kind of answers that a Buddhist monk would respond with. A Buddhist monk would not necessarily say, "I worship life." One of the teachings, the higher level teachings in Buddhism, is that there are actually no God to worship. There's the Buddha nature, there's a progressive realization of the Buddha nature leading to enlightenment. So in yet another example from the Kung Fu series, in one particular episode, they wanted a love scene for Cain. Okay, so he flashes back to his days in China when he and other monks were witnessing a beautiful dance, a dance by this beautiful dancer, and then the master teaches him about the naturalness of love and emotions and so forth. All of these are entirely Tao in origin and not Buddhist at all. In the Buddhism tradition, particularly if you are a monk from the Shaolin tradition, it is incredibly important that you take a vow of celibacy, and you are never, ever permitted to vary from that in the smallest extent. So this, of course, will make it impossible for them to have an episode where Cain has a love scene, and therefore they have to adjust. They may not even realize that they're not actually talking about a very authentic tradition of Buddhism, but they were just mixing and matching various elements from the East to make their story work, which, after all, is only entertainment for the Western audience. Western audience, they don't really know any better. They just want to see Cain, fight people and, and be a badass, right? So that's how it all went down. So a lot of the things that resonate today with modern audience, as you look at these old episodes of Kung Fu, like, yeah, that is so deep. Wow, that is so great. Those are actually not necessarily Buddhist in origin, but most likely from a Tao tradition. So those two things in reality don't really match that well, and I can address more and more of those misconceptions later on. But wow, Bill, you probably didn't expect that I would be talking about this topic so much, but I'm glad I worked your story in there.
Oh no, it's just fine. It's another one of those synergies that just happened to us,
Indeed.